medicine is incredible. It can save lives if you're sick, but that has nothing to do with health. Not having enough sex hormone is very closely linked to all the diseases. CDC top 10 causes of death, if you look them up, all the chronic diseases are intimately linked to declining hormones. The question is, how do we fix this problem?
Darshan Shah, MD, is a board-certified surgeon, published author, and founder of Next Health, the world's first and largest health optimization and longevity clinic. With expertise in all body systems, he's performed over 15,000 surgical procedures. As a health and wellness specialist, he's advised thousands of patients on how to optimize their well-being and extend their lifespan. You have literal firsthand experience of some of the pitfalls in our conventional system because as a practicing physician yourself, you were struggling with your health. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm a graduate of the traditional, Western medicine system. I trained in medicine about 30 years ago now. Like, I can't believe I'm saying that, but it's been 30 years. But back then, the whole system was built to take care of people that are really sick and dying from things like infections. They've already had a heart attack, or maybe they had a trauma in the emergency room, that kind of thing. So I went to medical school, graduated, did surgery, dove deep into surgery, worked in the emergency room, ICU, and I saw the worst of the worst, man. And I could tell you, medicine is incredible. It can save lives if you're sick, but that has nothing to do with health, right? And so the system is just not built for health, right? Like doctors, hospitals, insurance, all that's built to take care of you when you get sick. And about 100 years ago, people got sick from infections, and then we made antibiotics and infections went away. And then people weren't really getting sick that much anymore. But then what happened was our modern society was scared of this the population growth. And so we did a lot of things at that point in time to try to support this population growth that actually took us back. Things with like the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry, et cetera. And we made ourselves sick as a Western society. And then what we do in America follows Europe, follows the rest of the world, right? And I think there's this big misconception that, the medical system, seeing your doctor once a year is going to keep you healthy. That's not what it's for. It's really to make sure you're not in a disease state that's going to kill you. And if you are in a disease state that's going to cause a problem, the only tool that's really there is a pill, right? Or a surgery. And that's not what health is all about. So I always say, like, the Western medical system is for the 5% of people that are sick, truly sick. But really, there's 95% of us that are frustrated with this system. And I trained in that system. And, you've had many guests as doctors on this show. I've heard of quite a few of them. And all of us have told you, like, we got like 5 days of nutrition, exercise, and sleep education out of, thousands of days of education.
Yeah.
It's not focused on that.
It's profound. And of course, like you said, it could be absolutely life-saving in certain contexts.
Sure.
And we should be grateful for that. But now I'm a big fan of looking at the results. And, according to the CDC, this was just in 2022, 60% of American adults now have at least one chronic disease.
Absolutely.
40% have two or more. We're getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And we have all of this apparent innovation. But as you said, it's focused on treatment. It's focused on the treatment of when we're sick. And even within that, and I want to talk about that because our system doesn't much focus on looking at the causes of diseases.
Not at all.
It's hyper-focused on the treatment of symptoms.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about that a little bit and your experience also.
Yeah. So my experience is that, I came from this Western medical system, and I'll just tell you a quick story about me. I got sick myself. So being a surgeon, I was working 14, 16 hours a day, standing in the operating room 7 days a week. And after I was done with that, I was also an entrepreneur running the business of the surgery center and the doctor group. So I was working almost 20 hours a day. I rarely slept. I was eating whatever fast food, whatever donuts the nurses brought in. I wasn't sleeping. I was stressed out to the maximum. So what happened? What happens to anyone that lives that lifestyle, right? I was like 45 pounds overweight. I had 3 blood pressure medications on me because I couldn't get my blood pressure under control. And I was pre-diabetic, so metformin, and then also had an autoimmune condition. So I was on an immune suppressant medication. And I was so sick that I could barely move, breathe, and function in my day-to-day life. So, I thought as a doctor, I could get myself healthy, and I had no knowledge on getting myself healthy. So I went and hired a concierge doctor to try to get me healthy. And all he did was give me like 4 more medications, right? So I quickly realized I need to re-educate myself. So I did. I went and became a personal trainer actually and got my nutrition certification. And then I learned about functional medicine. So back then, about 10 years ago, when I learned functional medicine, it was a brand new kind of science. And that's focusing on the root cause of disease, because all these diseases come from 5 or 6 root causes that if you focus on those, you're going to avoid disease in the future, right? Now it's talking about like keeping the ship going in the right direction. If it's not going in the right direction for 30 years is when you finally start seeing symptoms, and that's when your blood work changes. But if you know 30 years beforehand that you're in the wrong direction, you can make a slight course adjustment and you're saved, right? And so that's what I talk to all my patients about now at my practice at Next Health, is really like we test and we focus on the root causes of disease so you never get to that place in the first place.
That sounds so good.
Yeah.
It sounds so obvious. But yet, if you think about this, you just mentioned, and I want to talk about some of these root causes
Sure.
of disease, by the way, but a lot of times, and an unfortunate thing that we've gone through recently is blaming our genes for these problems. And years ago, and I'm so grateful, and with this emergence of functional medicine, I know Mark Hyman is a friend of yours as well, but I had the great fortune of coming across a YouTube video of his like 17 years ago. So he was early on it, and I'm just like, he's talking about diabetes in a different way that I had ever heard. I didn't even know that type 2, I thought once you had it, you have it, and that's the end of the story. And he was talking about some of these principles, and it blew my mind. And even within that context, so many of our conditions are blamed on our genes. Like you just have this thing. And I talked with Dr. Bruce Lipton, who's a cell biologist, and he shared that less than 1% of all of our, if we're talking about our genes that we're born with, less than 1% of us are born with a true genetic defect where we have one of these conditions that, like type 1 diabetes, for example. Most of us come here with pretty decent genes, and diseases are activated in a way based on some of these root causes.
Absolutely.
Because what it really is, many diseases, if you want to frame it differently, we call them diseases, but they're adaptations.
Right.
And so let's talk about some of these root causes.
Yeah, let's definitely do that. So the mechanism that you're talking about, I think, while we were like learning about DNA and DNA science and genetics, it was such the early stages, and we all thought that was like the holy grail. We're going to figure all the disease out by sequencing the human genome. And what we quickly realized is that the genome is extremely complex, and it gets turned on and off based on root causes and your day-to-day habits, right? And you turn it on and off by adding methyl groups of the DNA and unwinding it. So that's called methylation of your DNA or your epigenome, right? And so the root causes of disease, there's a few root causes. One, everyone talks about inflammation, right? How inflamed you are can turn on some very deleterious disease genes that lead to Alzheimer's, heart disease, cancer, all sorts of, all the major causes of death. There's also hormonal imbalances or hormonal decline that happens as we age. There's mitochondrial dysfunction. There's changes in your gut microbe. Even the DNA and the bacteria and the viruses that live in our gut affect our genes. So they're separate organisms, but they're telling our genes whether to turn on and turn off, right? And so that's extremely important as well to recognize. So if you recognize these 5 kind of root causes of why we get sick and how they interact with our genes, it's really so much easier to avoid disease in the first place. And each one of those, we could talk about how we manage and mitigate problems in those root causes.
All right. The thing about inflammation, which is very real, we learn about this in school, but I think that it still seems like kind of a soft term in medicine and in health, because it's so kind of, I struggle to say this word, but kind of superficial. Like, it's inflammation, but I think it's because we think about it in terms of like, if we have an injury and we see an inflammation, but we don't think about that in terms of what's happening inside of our bodies.
Exactly.
So can you talk and unpack it a little bit more
Right.
so we understand how important it is?
Absolutely. So let's unpack inflammation a little bit, because this is a huge misconception. Because the reason we think it's a soft term is because it's hidden. It's happening in our body, and it's a silent killer. It's a silent flame burning inside of our body, literally just destroying us from the inside out. And we don't see it or feel it. And it leads to a lot of the causes of hidden diseases, like just like diabetes. You don't really know what's happening in you until you start losing your vision or your toe turns black, you know? Same with heart disease. Most people find out they have heart disease at their first heart attack, of which 50% of those are fatal, right? So inflammation is leading to these silent diseases. So it shouldn't be ignored. We should all understand that inflammation can occur in any of us. There's many causes of inflammation, but there's a couple of main causes of inflammation. Most of our white blood cells, our immune system, live around our gut, right? So we all know that most of our immune cells, about 90% of them, are in our gut, and they're protecting us from the outside environment, because our gut has 5 times the surface area of our skin. So this is what's really protecting us from the outside environment, separating toxins from nutrients and letting nutrients come in and toxins stay out. Okay. So what happens if your gut is not healthy? If your gut's not healthy, toxins are coming in. Your white blood cells on the inside of you are getting overactivated. They're just trying to kill toxins. And just like any army fighting a war, sometimes you shoot the enemy, but you also shoot your friends, right?
Friendly
You start
fire.
friendly fire, right? And there's so much friendly fire going on that now you're causing damage to your own cells. And so that's where inflammation is slowly working on the inside of you to cause damage from the inside out. And this is a 20, 30-year process, right? And so people like to throw around the term inflammation when they don't really understand the mechanism of what's going on the inside. And people get very confused with like the superficial inflammation that happens like when you bump your elbow or you hurt your knee or something like that, or you scrape yourself. But that same process, that same ugliness that you see on a joint when you like hurt it, is happening actually on the inside. And so that's where we really got to focus on gut health to make sure our gut is as strong as it can be to keep the toxins out and bring the nutrients in. And part of your gut is actually your mouth. So a lot of inflammation can actually start in your oral health as well. So you'll be surprised how much oral health problems is related to Alzheimer's, cancer, and also heart disease.
Right. Yeah. It's so powerful. And it wouldn't be surprising if we just all accept that it's all connected.
Yeah, it's all connected.
So we can't separate our gums from, our toes. Like they're inherently going to be talking to each other. Our cells are.
Yeah.
But you mentioned this. This is one of the best terms, analogies that I've ever heard for inflammation, with friendly fire.
Friendly fire.
Fire's in the word. That's such a good analogy.
Exactly.
So you mentioned how our gut can play a huge role in our body's inflammation. And so that would lead me to ask you about the role of food in this. Yeah. So I would imagine that certain foods that we eat can definitely contribute to inflammation.
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot from your podcast about food. You're like the guru of this subject, but absolutely. So let's unpack the gut a little bit, okay? So your gut has actually 3 layers of protection from the outside environment. That's how important it is, okay? First, you have a mechanical layer. That's the mucus. It's a mucus membrane, the mucus cells on the inside of your gut that are secreting mucus to create a mechanical barrier from the outside environment to the inside. Then you have the microbiome, the millions and trillions of bacteria, viruses, fungi that are actively working. Like their job there is to break down bad things and bring good things in and help us process nutrients, make them absorbable, etc. And then finally, you have your enterocytes. Your enterocytes are the most complicated cell, one of the most complicated cells next to our brain cells in our body. They actually can feel particles of proteins and amino acids and nutrients and understand what they are and say, okay, this one should come in and this one should stay out. This one should come in and this one should stay out. But between every enterocyte, it's like a brick wall, right? You have some spackling, okay? That spackling is called zonulin. Zonulin is one of the proteins of spackling. And if the mucous membrane is unhealthy and the microbiome is unhealthy, it starts breaking down that spackling and your brick wall just starts breaking down. And now everything just starts filtering through, and now your white blood cell, your army has to come and fight it, right? Sorry about all the analogies. I hope you don't mind.
I love it. Love it.
So this is where we really need to keep all three of those components of your gut healthy. Okay, so you asked what is in food that keeps your gut healthy? Well, there's certain things in food that feeds your microbiome. Your microbiome needs to eat as well. And those things, as you know, are like phytonutrients and fiber, right? And so I think a lot of people, everyone's so focused about what's the best diet. And it's really not about like what combinations of food you're eating. Is what I always say is the Pareto principle. What's the 20% of the information that gives you 80% of the result? For me, it's avoid ultra processed food because that's full of chemicals that's destroying your mucous membrane, your microbiome, and unspackling your gut cells. It does all three of those. Then there's also fiber, right? You need to feed your microbiome, right? And micronutrients and phytonutrients. So you got to get enough of that as well. And so that keeps your gut healthy. And then obviously, your body needs protein because your skeletal muscle needs to be healthy to keep you healthy for a long period of time, give you longevity, give you health span.
That's so good. Thank you for unpacking those three layers.
Yeah.
And yeah, you just mentioned, one food category, and I struggle to even call them foods at this point, but ultra processed foods can damage all three of these and do damage all three of these. Earlier, you shared something, and I don't want to miss this. You were talking about the evolution of our healthcare system and also the evolution of our society, which we bumped up against interesting circumstances where, we've got a growing population and we need to feed people. And so, because for me, I'm always looking at things of like, let me have a balanced perspective of this. The outcome that we have is we're inundated with ultra processed foods now, but this didn't necessarily start with malicious intent. There was a movement to feed Americans. And due to that, we had this advent of government subsidies to support farmers in growing certain crops. Now, and I heard you talk about this as well, when we talk about monetization and corporations and being able to get their hands on this money, there was a recent time span here, and this was published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, and they tracked the consumption of government subsidized foods for about 15 years to see like what are the health outcomes. Now, here's where it gets interesting is that with these government subsidies, it might have had the initial intent in feeding Americans, right? Making sure everybody has food. But it kind of devolved to a place where it's primarily going to these cash crops or the primary crops that are showing up through our drive-through windows and in ultra-processed foods. Genetically modified dwarf wheat,
right,
corn, soy, sugar, and the like. And so what they found was that over this 15-year time span, almost $200 billion were given in government subsidies. Huge amount of money. Huge. What could we just imagine what we could do with that? But they found that people who had the highest consumption of government subsidized foods had about a 30% greater incidence of developing obesity, of course, type 2 diabetes, and what was remarkable, and this is where I'm bringing this up, higher rates of inflammation noted by C-reactive protein.
Sure.
They were more inflamed.
Yeah.
They were far more unhealthy when eating the foods that we're and when I say we, I mean that literally because this is our tax dollars.
Yes, our tax dollars, right? Exactly.
So yeah, it comes full circle in understanding these things might have started off like, again, with good intent, but they've kind of devolved and we have to pull ourselves out of this situation. You and I both, we've spent, and this is what we're doing is like, we want to create system change.
Right.
But most importantly, it's you as an individual realizing this and just saying, hey, you know what? That 80-20 rule, let me shift over and make 20% of my diet ultra-processed foods and 80% real foods. What do you think about that ratio?
Absolutely. I mean, if you can even come close to that ratio, like for most people, it's the opposite, right? And so like, and people have to realize too, like when you go to a fast food window, all of that's processed food. Most restaurants, everything you're eating in the restaurant is processed food, right? I mean, we're lucky here in LA, like we have some that are just super focused on high quality ingredients, but most of these chain restaurants is all ultra processed food. And people also don't understand that you're going to end up spending a little bit more money eating non-ultra processed food, but you're going to get fuller faster. You're going to be much healthier. You're going to feel great. So you don't even eat as much. So actually for most of my patients, and I try to convince them, like how am I going to afford to go to, Whole Foods? I'm like, try it for a couple of weeks and see what happens. 2 weeks, they're eating like 30% less actual food, and they feel great, And so I think
Which is
the
priceless.
yeah, which is priceless. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. The ultra processed food industry, the other thing that unfortunately we've gotten ourselves in this situation with subsidized crops, that now you have all these crops that basically cost nothing to grow because the government's paying you to grow them. What do you do with it? Well, you turn into high fructose corn syrup, right? And now so much food has that in it as well. Like, it's going to take generations to get out of this mess that we put ourselves into with subsidized food leading to ultra processed food. So we just don't have time. Like, if you're living right now, you don't have time to wait for systemic change. You got to make the change in your own habits right now.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about. Like, how do we make change when these systems are so reliant? They're profiting so much
Yeah.
from our collective sickness, whether this is the way that our healthcare system is constructed right now, but also our food system. These folks that are getting the lion's share of those billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in government subsidies, they're not going to be happy to, like, our people are, they want to eat more, fill in the blank, real food. Like, how do we encourage that change when so many entities are profiting from us?
Right. And it's not even the farmers anymore that are growing all this and getting the
Right,
subsidies.
that
Now
part.
it's like the food industry, like the massive food industry that needs these farmers to give them high fructose corn syrup because it gives them much better margins, right? So, unfortunately, we've made this food system, it's all corporate. And what's the purpose of a corporation? Is to make profits. How do you do that? You decrease the prices and you increase consumption. How do you decrease prices? Make food as cheap as possible. So it's basically a chemical mix of ingredients. It's not really food anymore. And how do you make increased consumption? Well, you make it hyper addictive, right? So you make it hyper palatable. People, you eat a donut and you need another one right away, and you need another one right away.
Homer
right?
Simpson vibes.
Exactly. It's Homer Simpson vibes. And so I think, you asked, how do you make a change? I think number one is what you're doing right now with me. Like, we're educating people. Like, I think people know they're sick. People are sick and tired of being sick and tired. Dr. Hyman loves to say that, and I love it. And I think people know they're sick. They're tired of it. And they just need to understand that the reason is literally in the center of the supermarket, right? That's where all the ultra processed food lives. Stay away from the center. I always joke, I do a lot of talks all over the country, and I always joke, like, I ask people, like, who here has a pantry? Everyone raises their hand. I'm like, you will be less sick if you take your pantry out of your house and you make it a wine cellar. Change that, get rid of that pantry, like, empty it out, and you'll just get healthier right off the bat.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, so good. Yeah. I love this connection because it's something that we all got to eat. We're making this choice about what we're eating each day, and we're either contributing to inflammation or we are helping to reduce it.
Right.
And so it's such an important input. Now, in addition to that, so inflammation is one of these root causes of disease, and so many things stem from that. The father of modern medicine, Hippocrates.
Yeah.
All disease begins in the gut.
Right.
Might have known a little something, but something that is really emerging now, and more people are aware of this, is the impact of our hormones.
Right.
And so you mentioned that as well. So
Sure.
what are some of the, first of all, what are hormones, and what are some of the impacts that this can be having as far as causing disease?
Yeah, great question. So what are hormones? Let's answer that. So hormones is a way for your cells in your body, in one part of your body, to communicate with the rest of the cells in your body. So basically a communication mechanism that occurs from your brain and your other organs to other organs and to the brain itself. And you have multiple different types of hormones, right? So everyone knows about their sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, but there's also hormones that come from your brain, like growth hormone. There's also hormones that come from your adrenal glands. So you have all sorts of different hormones. And evolutionarily, we stop needing hormones after the ages of having our children, right? Like, evolution basically wants to make sure that we stay alive long enough to have children, and then we need to go away, so we're eating less of the food and using less of the resources, right? But now we live in modern society. We have lots of resources. We can stay alive if we want to. Unfortunately, we're genetically programmed for hormones to start declining after a certain age. So for men and women, that hormone is testosterone. You have a decline in testosterone after the age of 30, and it's very predictable. And women go through menopause, as we know as well. And not having enough sex hormone is very closely linked to all the diseases. Once again, Alzheimer's, all the CDC top 10 causes of death, if you look them up, all the chronic diseases are intimately linked to decline in hormones. Okay. So the question is, how do we fix this problem, right? And so there's been a couple of decades of really bad research published, like the Women's Health Initiative that convinced people not to use hormones, but that was made with synthetic hormone. As long as you're using bioidentical hormones and you're doing it with a practitioner that really understands how to do it, you'll become much healthier. And more importantly, you'll avoid chronic disease. It's a root cause of disease is hormone deficiency. So we educate a lot of our clients on how to fix their hormones. We test their hormones, then we educate them on how to improve them just with health and habit changes. And if that isn't working, we add supplementation. And if that isn't working, then we add hormone replacement therapy.
This is a good place to talk about Next Health.
Yeah, sure.
And what you guys are doing. Can you share that?
Yeah, for sure. So, after I got myself healthy, so it literally took me 8 months to get healthy after I understood like how to eat, sleep, and exercise. I said, there's definitely another opportunity here to help more people do this, because I was having a lot of patients come to my surgical clinic and I was telling them all the things that I'm learning. They're like, how are you losing so much weight? How are you looking so good? And I tell them, here's what I'm doing. And they got healthy too within a few months and they avoided surgery completely too. So I was like, I just want to change what I'm doing. So I hired someone to run my surgical business, and I started Next Health, which we started with a small location in West Hollywood, 1,000 square feet, and I thought I'd just give it a shot. All the things I'm learning, hormone optimization, sleep optimization, nutrition, everything, put it all under one roof. We talked a little bit about light, breathing, grounding, all these technologies that bring those to us on a more consistent basis. So we put a hyperbaric oxygen chamber in there, a cryotherapy chamber, a heat sauna, and all under just kind of one roof in a little small office. And we were getting people healthy, lots of people healthy, and became a business. And so now we have 6 locations all over the United States, 3 in LA, 1 in New York, 1 in Hawaii, and we're franchising. So we have about 30 locations opening in the next couple of years.
Amazing,
Yeah.
Amazing. And so many of the guests who've been on this show have been to Next Health.
Oh,
and
cool.
It's really remarkable. Whether
awesome.
it's, Mark Hyman, Ben Greenfield, I saw,
Yeah.
came by recently. And of course, I'm going to come by here soon. So I'm really
it.
excited about that. But just the fact that you have all of these things that people are learning about under one roof and making it accessible, more and more accessible is really cool.
Right. That's the whole purpose of it, because, I was going all over LA trying to find like a cold plunge or a cryo. This was like 10 years ago. No one even heard of cold plunges and cryo and sauna therapy and hyperbaric. It took me all day to do it all. So I'm like, if I'm going to buy these things for myself, I'm just going to put them under one roof and do it all in 1 hour. And that's the genesis of Next Health.
Amazing. And so with that being said, I would imagine that the treatments and the protocols are based on the person.
Absolutely.
And not just, and so can you talk about that? So do you guys do like blood work and things like that as well?
It all starts with the blood work. So look, you can come in and just get a tech membership. So say you're a young, healthy, person and you just want to just use the technology. We have memberships for that, but we really encourage people to do their blood work. And we check over 1,000 different biomarkers. We do genetic testing. We even do whole body MRIs and cancer screening and heart scans as well. And we take all that information, we call it our executive physical, we tie it all together and we come up with a 12-point health optimization plan on the 12 aspects of wellness. And over the course of the following year, we execute on this plan with our patients. And so it's a really great system. It's kind of like what I did for myself, and then I kind of refined it for my patients. And I feel like it's very complete. And I really encourage people to become the CEO of their own health. I talk about this a lot because I really believe in educating people on what the biomarkers mean and how to follow them. Because just like, one of them is hemoglobin A1C. It doesn't go from like 5.0 to 7.5 overnight. It takes 20 years. And the only person vested in making sure you stay healthy is really you, right? Yeah. So you got to be able to follow some of these numbers and understand like your top 8 to 10 biomarkers.
Yeah. And I want to talk about some of those biomarkers.
Sure.
You just mentioned hemoglobin A1C. So
Right.
This is one of the primary biomarkers indicating states of diabetes.
Right. Yeah. Or just metabolic disease in general. Right. Exactly.
The average person would think about it in those terms of
Right.
it just being about diabetes, but it's
Right.
so much more.
Right. So, you're right. Exactly what you said. The average person would say hemoglobin A1C tells you whether or not you have diabetes. That's Western medicine, right? Like no one says there's a problem until it's over 7 and now it's like you have diabetes, right? But literally we tell people when you're above 5.5, 5.6, you're going in the wrong direction. We need to start making changes now. So we educate them on how to avoid sugar, how to avoid carbohydrate. We get them a continuous glucose monitor, for example, and we kind of retrain them on how to eat so they flatten their glucose curve and they avoid metabolic syndrome completely. And so that's one example of a biomarker that if you're watching it, you can immediately make a change. And metabolic syndrome, I think I just said this, but it's like the root cause of one of the root causes of all the other diseases. So you stop metabolic disease in its track, you're likely not to get heart disease, Alzheimer's, other neurodegenerative diseases. And that's one of like 8 biomarkers we follow.
So we've covered inflammation. We talked a little bit about hormones. And I wanted to make this point as well that, now we know, and still, the average person isn't aware of this, but our fat tissue, our muscle tissue are both functioning really as endocrine organs and influencing what our hormones are doing. And in some ways, even our muscle being a reservoir for certain hormones is really fascinating. And this is looking at what we can do proactively or doing on accident that's influencing what our hormones are doing. And so if we are just kind of haphazardly being the average person in our society, just accumulating more and more body fat, we're going to see, and it kind of feeds into itself and being harder and harder to, quote, get rid of this fat as well. But we're going to see some unfavorable things happen with our hormones as a result. And, but proactively, we could focus on building more muscle. And I know that that's something that you educate your patients on as well, is the importance of muscle. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. So, muscle is probably next to your brain and your heart, probably the third most important organ in your body, right? This is what's giving you longevity and causing you to stay alive for a longer time. Your muscle is where your metabolism happens. All of the stuff we talk about, insulin and glucose regulation, it's all happening in your muscle, okay? So the more muscle tissue you have, the more likely you are to keep glucose low, leading to less fat accumulation. So really, I always say, if there's one type of exercise, you only have time to do one type of exercise, is strength training. That's where you're going to get the most benefit, especially after the age of 40. Because after the age of 40, once again, we're genetically programmed to start heading down the path of sarcopenia. And that's why a lot of older people you see like in their 80s and 90s are frail. They can barely move. They have a hard time getting around without help. And the frailty also occurs in the brain and in your organs as well. So if you keep your muscle healthy, you'll likely live a longer and healthier life. So we talk a lot about building muscle. I'm a big believer in doing, strength training workouts 2 or 3 times a week. I tie that in with functional workouts. So like having good mobility exercises, especially after the age of 45, 50, and good protein intake. Creatine, I'm also a big believer in creatine. I tie all that together into when I create like a workout plan or an exercise program for our patients.
Amazing. I love that you mentioned, of course, the strength training aspect. And if there was one form of exercise to do, that's the one to do. Because you also get, it's so crazy, when I was in college and, we have kinesiology and also personal trainer certifications and whatnot. And it's kind of like this, like, black or white aerobic or non-aerobic exercise, anaerobic exercise. But when you're strength training, and depending on the way that you do it, this is also, you're getting aerobic benefit too.
Absolutely.
Right. And so it's like you can really stack some conditions in your favor. And as you mentioned, this is something we can proactively, especially before we get to our senior years, and really accumulate some solid muscle tissue. It's going to help us to age more gracefully. But you also mentioned functional stuff, like being able to, if we want to be active, we've got to pay attention to those small things, and I'm seeing this more and more, even with younger people. It's just like, if you don't use it, you lose it. And so if you want to be active and do dynamic movements, you've got to train those things. Right. If you've just been I go to the gym and lift weights for, an hour, 3 times a week, that is amazing. You're running laps around most of society. But then that's just what you're doing, and then all of a sudden you want to, pick up some new sport and you end up getting injured, you've got to train these things. And so I'm a huge, huge advocate now of like doing bounding exercises like jumping from one foot to the other, jump rope, stuff like that, especially as people are getting older, because if you see my 12-year-old son run around, he's just doing that stuff all the time.
Exactly.
I can't
without even
stop
thinking.
it, right?
Like, he's just like,
But for us, we're just we become a lot more mechanical as we go on. We just kind of do the things that we need to do. But if you want to be creative and to play and to do those things, I'm so glad that you mentioned that as well.
Yeah. You know, I always say, like, if you see, a lot of my patients are actually like hard charging individuals. They have like 2 jobs, or they're running a company, and they don't have a lot of time, right? So they're like, look, man, I can give you 2 workouts a week. What do you want me to do? I'm like, do 1 strength training, 1 functional muscle building exercise. And I put together, like, you know, just stuff that speaks to them. So, you know, one of the things I ask is, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? Like, when you're 75 and retired, like, what do you want to do? I want to travel. Okay, so then you need to lift a bag over your head and put it in the overhead compartment, right? You're going to need to be able to push things along. You're going to pull things, right? And so I just basically, you know, tell them, get a sandbag and just start doing some exercise where you're lifting the sandbag over a pole. Get a sled push, sled pull, squats, right? You see, you're 12-year-old, you can probably squat in a second. Most like people over 40 are scared to squat, right? Because they don't know if they're going to get back up or not. Yeah. So do a few just, you know, sit stand exercises, squatting. So we put all that together, and I think it's so incredibly important. And I'm so glad you double clicked on it. When you turn 40, you got to start doing some functional training, or else you are going to lose it. And just because you go to the gym and you're lifting these heavy weights, you're still going to lose the functionality of those joints, those muscles, and them working in concert in balance too, right?
You know, I'm so glad that you also mentioned the impact that muscle has on our blood sugar,
right?
You know, and its relationship with insulin and blood glucose, because, and this is what you're doing, you're giving your patients the opportunity to have choice, metformin or muscle. You know, like, you have some say in this. But our model has been it won't even mention the muscle, you know, let alone all the other things that you have access to today. But, you know, just understanding that this other thing it has its place. Metformin has its place. Insulin has its place. But there are certain requirements our genes expect from us.
Right.
Just for normal functioning. And one of those is muscle contraction and actually using our bodies.
Right.
Who'd have thought?
Exactly.
You know?
Who'd have thought a pill wouldn't replace that? You know?
Exactly. We don't have that, you know? And this brings me to another one of these root causes of disease, which is mitochondrial dysfunction. Let's talk about this one. Again, going back to my university classes, we talked about the mitochondria, energy power plant of the cells, but it didn't have application to me. Right. It didn't make sense in my life. How does this matter?
And see, this is the problem with all the root causes, right? Because they're kind of invisible. They're microscopic. They're inside of you. The mitochondria are the most important thing in our cell, next to the nucleus of the cell, right? Because it's providing the energy for the entire cell to do everything it does. A liver cell can't do what it does without mitochondria working well. Same with your heart, same with your brain, same with every organ in your body. So your mitochondria, for those of you who don't know, are the powerhouses of the cell. They're actually thought to be a separate organism that ended up symbiotically living inside of our cells to power it, to give it the energy to combine with other cells and replicate. And so this happened, you know, millions of years ago, and now we live synergistically together. And the reason that's important is because just as much as you treat your own health, the health of your cells, you have to also talk about treating your mitochondria. And your mitochondria require precursors to make energy. Energy is ATP, that's a molecule of energy. And these precursors of energy that the mitochondria need, they have, you know, people have heard of NAD, NMN, etc., taking them as supplements, but all of that also comes from food and eating good, nutritious food as well. And so making sure your diet is on point really helps your mitochondria function well and have the precursors it needs. And then mitochondria get tired and old after a while, so you need to make new mitochondria. That's called mitochondrial biogenesis. How do you do that? Really, it's so counterintuitive. By stressing your mitochondria, it forces them to make more mitochondria. And so how do you stress your mitochondria? Things like HIIT exercise, things like heat therapy or sauna, cold, high intensity weightlifting as well stresses your mitochondria, causes you to make new and more powerful mitochondria. And so everyone needs to add some of these things into their day-to-day routine. I was talking to you earlier, like so many things are free and we take them for granted. And they're actually the healthiest things on the planet for us. Things like air and light and cold and heat, simple things. And they're incredibly beneficial to our health. But we end up just sitting inside all day long, not taking advantage of any of it, you know?
Yep. And also we have our creature comforts and controlled, temperature is all the same. But if we were living in a natural context, we'd have exposure to all these things,
Right. Exactly.
and we just kind of hiding out right now. And it's so funny, like and I know a lot of people, myself included, this has happened, but we might have a cold plunge tub or access to that, but then we'll have, our temperature on the same setting and be afraid to go outside. Like, and I just went for a walk. It was a little bit chilly, with my mother-in-law and my son just yesterday. And of course, it's very different from being in St. Louis. When I say chilly versus LA chilly, it's totally different. But that's what it's all about. Like getting out and the weather is kind of brisk and the fresh air and the sun's going down. You're getting those light inputs. All of these things help for healthy expression of our genes, of our cells.
Absolutely.
And so much of this is free. It's just getting our butt outside.
Yeah. And it's like, it's so funny. Like I challenge my patients to do this first thing in the morning. Go outside with no shirt on, no shoes on, and just stay outside on the ground for 15 minutes and just get exposed to the first light of the sun, right? And everyone's like, no way, are you crazy? Like, what do you think our caveman ancestors did for thousands of years? That's what they did. They got out of the cave with no shoes on, no shirt on, and they got exposed to the sun. That's what health is all about. That first morning light sets your circadian rhythm. The little bit of coldness gets your mitochondria active again, right? The grounding rechanges your electrical biochemistry of your body. It's all tied together.
Amazing. So, of course, we've talked about several of these root causes. We've talked about inflammation, hormone imbalances, mitochondrial dysfunction, the microbiome. Is there anything else?
Insulin dysregulation, we talked about that as well. Those are the 6 causes that I've identified.
Amazing. So again, this is putting more power into our hands to be aware of some of these things. But then the question is, if you are tracking some of these things, and many people are getting blood work done, but they might not be getting an education about what these things mean. And also science-backed protocols to help with some of these things.
Right.
And that's what you're providing. But also I want to ask you about some of the more innovative or newer forms of treatments that you guys are doing as well. You got a variety of different IV treatments that you're doing. Let's talk about some of those.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I kind of got into just by accident was the whole longevity science movement, which occurred kind of all at the same time. It's so crazy how everything just kind of is occurring right now, right? And when my patients got healthy, and myself included, it's like, hey, what's next? Like, you get addicted to being healthy and energetic and feeling vibrant, right? You're like, what's next? I'm like, so I started looking out there, and being a doctor, I have access to these incredible conferences and scientists, and you hear about things such as stem cells, IV NAD therapy, IV exosome therapy. We're doing a treatment called therapeutic plasma exchange as well, which is like cutting edge, but it's been technology that's locked up in the hospital for like 40 to 50 years to treat disease, bringing it out to people that are healthy to really improve their current state of health and make them better and turn back their aging clock. Those are the kind of things that we're providing as well.
Amazing. Can you talk a little bit about like what is something that you would recommend? Of course, this would be personalized, but for the average person that's just kind of feeling, they're not as energetic and they're just wanting to have, like, just to feel a little bit better, maybe improve some of their biomarkers. What are some of these treatments that can help with that? Specifically, matter of fact, let's talk about longevity.
Yeah, sure.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, okay, the basic tenet that I have about longevity is there's really not a good reason to do any of these expensive kind of cutting edge treatments if you don't have the basics right.
Yes, thank you.
Right?
Yeah.
Like if
Yeah.
you're going to do a therapeutic plasma exchange and then go to McDonald's afterwards and then, go drink and go to bed at like midnight and wake up at 5 a.m, just forget it. You're wasting your money. So I always tell people, first we get your nutrition, your exercise, and your sleep right. And then we focus on all of those 6 root causes of disease. And then once we get all that right, we can do some of the longevity stuff. And what a lot of patients are doing now that have everything else right, and they're lucky they have the money to do this right now. Some of this stuff is a little bit expensive, but the price is coming down like exponentially every year. But they're doing therapeutic plasma exchange followed by stem cell and exosome therapy. And I think that's really cutting edge right now.
So can you talk about what is that?
Yeah, therapeutic plasma exchange. Yeah. So this is a cutting edge treatment that actually comes from, like I mentioned earlier, a hospital-based treatment that has been done for years to treat like an autoimmune crisis. And what happens is you have someone come to your office and you put an IV in one arm. You remove the blood from that arm and it goes into like a large machine that looks like a dialysis machine, but it's actually a giant centrifuge. And that giant centrifuge spins the blood and it separates it into its components of blood cells and plasma. Now the blood cells go back into you via another IV, but that plasma is completely removed and discarded and replaced with another fluid, okay? And the reason we do this is because if you're sick or if you're inflamed or if you're having toxins accumulate inside your blood, it's really all accumulating in your plasma. That's where all that stuff is living. Inflammation, immune complexes, even tau protein and amyloid protein that, are the proteins that lead to Alzheimer's, all that's accumulating in your blood. When you remove it and you do a series of treatments, then you literally help your body eliminate these toxic substances. And that's what therapeutic plasma exchange does.
Amazing. Can you talk a little bit about the NAD?
Yeah. NAD, as I mentioned before, is a precursor of ATP, which is energy. As we age and as we become sick from all these different causes and inflamed, our body is just using up our NAD as fast as it can get it, right? It just does not have enough NAD. And, we live in one of the most toxic environments in human history right now. So our cells are all working incredibly hard to just remove toxins on a constant basis. So they're all NAD depleted, which means your mitochondria don't have the precursors. So your mitochondria can't work as hard and your cells just don't have enough energy. And without energy, none of your cells can do what they need to do. So the shortcut to all that is giving that NAD in your vein. And so we do IV NAD treatments. A lot of people have been getting it done and seeing incredible results. The treatment takes about 2 to 3 hours, and pretty soon there'll be some more advanced treatments coming out in the NAD world. Like, I don't know if you've ever had NAD. Have you had it? Yeah, you get a little sick, right? Have you felt that, like that feeling in your chest?
I don't even remember. It was like 3 or 4 years ago.
One of the things about IV NAD is it gets a little bit uncomfortable. It can cause like a tightness in your chest. Like, it's not your heart, it's just a feeling that it causes. And I'm excited about some of the new NAD treatments that are coming out that will eliminate that, and we can give the treatment a little bit faster. I think there'll be a lot more people doing it. But, I do it whenever I've come back from like an international trip, or whenever I've just recovered from a sickness, or whenever I just didn't get a good night's sleep and I'm just feeling really low energy, I'll go do an IV NAD treatment.
I love this so much because we've got these great science-backed innovations that are more pro-health,
Right.
Like they're more health affirming, and instead of, again, trying to treat illnesses and conditions after they've already set in, which you are amazing at that, obviously. Yeah. But these are some proactive things that we can do to support our health. But you also shared that the basics first. I love that so much because we could change and improve so many things about us.
Yeah.
And even thinking in terms of our mitochondrial health, even with cold exposure and lifting some weights and all these different things, we can empower these systems. And it reminded me of our brown adipose tissue,
Right.
and that cold exposure, because it's brown because it's even more dense in mitochondria. But, our muscle tissue, our brown adipose tissue, just our lifestyle, implementing some of these things, we can get some incredible changes. But the question is, are we doing them? And this is why your work is so important, because you're inspiring people and a lot of times, some of these things people have never heard of. Still, like, we've got a lot of work to do still.
Right.
But the fact that you're out here sharing this and your experience, your perspective is so remarkable, and you're making it more and more available for people. And so I'd love if you could share, where can people connect with you? Where can they, you already mentioned you have 6 locations and now it's expanding even more, but just to get into your universe, to learn more, where can people find out more information?
Yeah, so I put a lot on my Instagram page it's at Darshan Shah MD, and I also have the same handle for my YouTube as well, and so we're putting stuff on there. As I mentioned to you, I just getting started with the information spreading, and so I love it. I'm writing a book right now that'll be out next year, and then come to Next Health. Go to next-health.com, and you can see one of our locations. We're franchising all over the country, so hopefully we'll be in many more cities soon. And just come by. We'll give you a free tour. We'll show you around, get a cryotherapy session, and maybe you're inspired to do some blood work. It all starts with a simple blood test. We call that our baseline blood test. And we can give you so much information and show you what direction to head in. And like, what's the Pareto principle? What's the 20% of things you can do to make a massive difference? That's what we like to start with.
Amazing. So listen, for a lot of people, this is their first time hearing from you, but I'm telling you right now, in 2, 3, 4 years, you're going to be everywhere. So this is like early adopter getting into Dr. Shah's universe. So I really appreciate you coming by and sharing your insights.
Thank you, man. It's so great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
And you see that your blood sugar goes up 80 points, which would be a really high rise. You can say immediately in one time of just checking this food with your continuous glucose monitor, this food is likely causing a big insulin surge in me. And we know that one of the many functions of insulin is that it blocks fat burning in the body.